we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you ever wanted to reach out to the podcast, please reach out on our DMs, hit us up on our Twitter, on our Instagram, at the Bigmark Pod, at the Bigmark Podcast, wherever you want to be. Leave a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, like the channel, subscribe to the channel, like the video. If you ever wanted to donate to the podcast, you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. There's a couple different levels there to keep the lights on, so to speak. And yeah, again, first and foremost, I always want to say thank you all for spending your time with me tonight. You could have been anywhere else in the world. And tonight, today, this morning, this afternoon, wherever you might be listening, thank you all. I really appreciate it. And you're here to listen when I get all excited and want to talk about all this fun stuff and smash the microphone. Again, thank you all for being here. I'm really excited about today's episode. I was really, really excited. My parents, my parents who live usually in Germany are home. Pops and Andrea, thank you again for a new cache of shirts. I said they got us a few more episodes with a few more shirts, because again, if you haven't noticed, I'm trying to wear a different shirt for every episode. If you look back, I haven't worn the same one yet, or have I? Anyway, thank you all for continuing to watch with all these different shirts. But I'm super happy to have my parents home, see their place that they're going to be in, and yeah, it's been great. And I had the awesome opportunity to go and see a movie with my pops the other night, and we went to go see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Really great movie, super cool for us. I mean, me and my pops have always really loved Indiana Jones. Seemed to be one of the movies that we always used to rent when we were watching movies. Looking back on it, maybe we didn't rent it as much as I thought we did, but I used to love watching those movies. We watched all of them: Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, The Last Crusade. We watched that, I think, the most. That was my favorite, so I'm pretty sure we watched that the most, and we watched a lot of Temple of Doom. That might have been my dad's favorite. And then The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. We might have saw that in theaters, but because I think that came out around 2008 or so. And again, just such a great movie. And with all these awesome movies, Oppenheimer, the Barbie movie, all these new movies, again, Indiana Jones, it seems to be this hopefully revival of cinema. I mean, it kind of took such a major hit during COVID, and as much as we've been able to watch TV at home and have movies at home, I think we really have missed that cinematic experience, right? Like, especially Oppenheimer being shot in IMAX, right? Like, that's like, you'll never be able to experience that in fact, shooting film on a giant fucking piece of film, or shooting movies on a giant piece of film, it doesn't make sense not to see it on a giant screen, because that's what it's all for. It's supposed to make the screen, or everything on the screen, just pop and look beautiful. Anyway, hopefully this is one of the many movies that are part of this new bastion. I mean, so far, the movie's been out for a little bit now. So far hasn't had amazing critical acclaim. And I mean, I don't know. It's always difficult doing an Indiana Jones movie, because there's a certain level of camp that exists in the movies, right? A certain level of suspension of disbelief, or kind of corny, kind of hokiness, because it's based on like adventure comics and stuff, where there was things that happened that weren't necessarily rooted 100% reality, or they were, trumped up a little bit, or there was a comedic effect attached to it, right? So it's always hard to tread that line without going into the corny, or without not being able to capture any of that kind of feel of, there's some quirkiness, there's some funniness, there's some things, there's some elements of the story that Again, you might question the laws of physics or certain things like that. Again, like look at Raiders of the Lost Ark. They found the fucking Ark of the Covenant and their ghosts fucking flew out of it. So like, what are we talking here? We're not fucking talking about real life stories here. These are adventure stories, adventure novels, are based on stories from the war and before, but usually kind of based around semi-propaganda about, you know, Americans and winning the war and all kinds of stuff like that, but also fighting for the really beautiful thing. And I don't want to get into it too far with this episode because I want to do an episode solely based on Indiana Jones alone. But just the idea of like preserving history and fighting for that and being a warrior for that kind of adds this interesting intellectual feel to all the Indiana Jones movies. So again, it's always really tough when you're doing an Indiana Jones movie, no matter what. And Crystal Skull was met with pretty much unanimous bad critiques by all critics or otherwise. So although it wasn't a terrible movie, personally, I think it was okay. It had some merit. But I think every movie is also a victim of its time. It's hampered by the limits of its own technology. I think the Red Skull said something like that. Anyway, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, 2023 action adventure film. Whenever you're listening to this podcast, might be later than 2023. But action adventure film, like I mentioned, you know, essentially Indiana Jones is probably like the quintessential action adventure movie. It's probably always cited as, you know, anyone pitching a movie, they're like, it's Indiana Jones meets, you know, Father the Bride or something, whatever kind of movie they're writing. Director James Mangold, who is a tremendous actor, or tremendous director. He directed Copland, Girl Interrupted, Walk the Line, 3:10 to Yuma. He also directed which I find one of the most interesting films, back-to-back films, if you will, at least in his filmography, of almost the same subject matter, but two very different movies, and also two movies that were very differently received by the public and critics alike. The Wolverine, which was an interesting adaptation on the kind of more Japanese-inspired comics that featured Wolverine. You know, the X-Men character, Marvel Comics. And then Logan, which was like an interpretation of the Old Man Logan comic series, which was Logan, aka Wolverine, has retired and is no longer fighting anymore and just kind of wants to ease out. All of his friends are dead and he's dealing with an aging, dementia-ridden Professor X. Tremendous movie. Fantastic. And everyone loved that movie. He also directed, James Mangold also directed Ford versus Ferrari. So he's picked it up. He's got it going. He's got a hell of a directing filmography. It was also co-written with Jez Butterworth, John Henry Butterworth, and then David Koepp, who David Koepp has like been a part of almost like too many blockbusters to count. He's just been kind of a writer on so many amazing Jurassic Park. I think he was involved in Apollo 13, just like all these different amazing movies. Again, as I mentioned before, this is the fifth movie in the Indiana Jones series, and it's starring, obviously, its lead man, Harrison Ford, has reprised his role. Jonathan Rhys-Davies is back as Sala. Karen Allen comes back as Marion. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, she is phenomenal. She's from Fleabag, which is a great television show. She is the female lead, but in no ways like which was really refreshing. As much as there's so much in this movie, which I'll continue to go into, there's so much in this movie that is a beautiful homage to not only the Indiana Jones character, but somewhat to Harrison Ford. Like, it's kind of funny. This movie is almost like a little bit of just like a nod of the proverbial Indiana Jones hat to Mr. Harrison Ford, which is really interesting. But Phoebe Waller-Bridge does a really good job at being the female heroine without being the like ditzy, just like feminine companion, bang piece, person that inevitably just gets in the way and gets Indy in more danger. She doesn't really do any of that, really. She drives a lot of the plot herself. She can be cutting herself and somewhat evil, and you can almost, it's hard to figure her out, to be truthfully honest. Her character in the movie, really interesting. Antonio Banderas makes an appearance. Toby Jones, he plays Phoebe Waller-Bridge's father in the movie, and he does a great job. I've actually really always liked Toby Jones's characters, even though he's done a lot of character stuff. Really liked his acting. Robert Boyd Holbrook, classic henchman. And then Mads Mikkelsen is the villain, and he is always good. He's been in many shows, many movies, but Casino Royale always comes to mind when I think of Mads Mikkelsen. He's just a fucking stud as Le Chiffre in that movie. Amazing. In some of the research I was looking, people are thinking, oh, this is a fucking cash grab, another Indiana Jones movie. They're just trying to do it, blah, blah, blah. It's actually plans for a fifth Indiana Jones movie were actually made back in the 70s. Originally, when a deal was made with Paramount for 4 sequels of Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's how much they fucking loved it. So Spielberg was actually initially set to direct this one, but He sadly stepped down in 2020. I think there was some COVID concerns, things like that. So it's a damn shame. Like I mentioned before, I kind of want to go more into this movie itself. So if you haven't seen this movie, spoiler alert, go watch it, come back, listen to the rest of this podcast. But we're basically just going to go into this movie because, like I mentioned, I want to kind of go into... I could dedicate a whole fucking episode on Indiana Jones alone because I love these movies so much. One of my favorite things about the Dial of Destiny was its opening sequence. It to be truthfully honest, it had me from the opening fucking credits going across the screen. They used the old school font. They came in there, same kind of swooping shots as any classic Spielberg opening, and it was immediately endearing to me. I don't know. I just loved it right off the bat. They did such an amazing job with everything, cinematography and everything. It starts off in 1944, so it's a flashback scene. Classic indie villain, German army, the Nazis, capture Basil Shaw, who is a scientist, researcher, historian, and they capture him looking for the Lance of Longinus, which is the tip of the spear that like poked Jesus when he was on the cross. And the Nazis historically were after a lot of these, just like the Ark of the Covenant. The Nazis were after a lot of artifacts from history, especially like ones tied to Christianity and religion, because Hitler was into the occult, and there was actually a lot of other scientists that were under him, or people that were involved in the army and the SS that were into the occult as well. That kind of driven a lot. Like the more and more you look into, you hear a lot about history of World War II. Like there's all these fucking side plots going on of people just being like, well, the world's fucking over. We're doing all these crazy cult shits, looking for crazy tombs, looking for space age shit, trying to do all kinds of stuff like aliens, time travel, alchemy, like you fucking name it. There was all these like weird side quests. People like, there was that whole I wish I could remember it right now, but there was that whole movie about all those American GIs like protecting art in Italy. So again, like there was all this weird shit that wasn't just pure like strategic battles, one fucking like, Churchill versus everyone else battles kind of thing. So again, there was all this occultism kind of happening in World War II, and this is kind of really digs into that, which again, classic indie, really nods to, Raiders and Last Crusade, again, Nazis, classic, fuck them. They used a lot of de-aging in these sequences. So they had a younger actor play like the body essentially of Harrison Ford, and then they basically use like a face app, like what the fuck do they call that shit? Oh my god, not Facetune. Damn it. Anyway, I can't think of anything today, but the they basically digitally impose Harrison Ford's face over this younger character. So he's doing mad stunts, doing all kinds of shit, and it still looks like Indiana Jones, like a young Indiana Jones. And then, of course, they have Harrison Ford himself also acting, and then they digitally de-age his face as well. So whether that's AI or whatever it might be, again, that whole thing is good. Like, there's still a lot of room to grow. You know, it wasn't 100% perfect, and, you know, it was funny with Harrison Ford doing it. You could kind of tell it was older Harrison Ford, even under the non-wrinkly, flat, you know, young-looking digital skin, so to speak. But, you know, we're going to start to see this more. We've already seen Bruce Willis licensed out his face for like some, I think somewhere overseas in Asia somewhere. There was a commercial, or it might have even been a movie, where Bruce Willis was in it. It was his voice. It was everything. But Bruce Willis himself, the real person, never did any filming, never did any fucking voiceover even. It was all completely AI. It was all completely just computer-generated monologue, and his voice was just a compilation of all the words that he's ever said on film. And then they just used his face. So I think we're going to start seeing this a lot more, probably as the technology gets better. That actors just will never die. We'll always see fucking actors. We'll always see the same actors. In fact, if they really are pretty, they can just fucking, you know, license their face off, and then they could just go live on an island or whatever and just rake in the dough. So again, we're starting to see this technology kind of come out a little bit more, which is really interesting. But they used it well. It didn't take away from the plot of the movie. Let's just put it that way. So the Nazis actually find the Lance of Longinus, and then they determine that it is a fake. But what they actually find that's potentially more important was half of Archimedes' dial. Archimedes' dial, whatever you want to fucking say it, shit. An Antikythera mechanism, which they actually found this Antikythera mechanism like in this ship in the Greek, like some old Greek warship. And they don't fucking know what it's about. It's like crazy. It's like way more advanced tooling. Evidence on it is like way more advanced than any other items that have ever been found from that same time period. So it's always baffled like archaeologists and historians, because they don't know where the fuck this thing actually came from, what the hell it was all about. Super interesting. They do think that Archimedes potentially actually designed it. So in this movie, this dial, Archimedes' dial, actually predicts time fissures. It uses mathematics to predict essentially future events. And these time fissures, where they don't really go into it as much as I'd like them to, but again, how the fuck does math somehow predict this idea? But again, if time is like this flat circle, it's not as linear as we expect it to. There's this idea potentially that there's breaks or inconsistencies in that time space where we can then pass through and then again use for time travel potentially. Really interesting. At one point there's so as they're trying to find all this stuff, I guess one of the scientists that's liaising the Germans, Dr. Voller, who's played by Mikkelsen, discovers this Antikythera mechanism, and he himself also knows that it's more important than any of the spears or anything that's going on, blah, blah, blah. So does Basil Shaw. And basically there's a little bit of a struggle going on. Indy comes to save Basil on this moving train, breaks in, steals the Antikythera mechanism, Archimedes' dial, from Dr. Voller, has this big battle. They're running on a train, which it's funny. I was talking to my pops afterwards. I'm like, you know, there's some stuff that was pretty believable, right? Like on in the movie, and he's like, yeah, but except like the running on the train part, like he's like, from personal experience, you know, old man balance isn't as good as you think, and he probably would have been falling off. In fact, what's even more incredulous, or what I'm even more incredulous about, is the fact that not only did Indiana Jones not fall off the train due to his old man balance, but his hat never flew off his head. It was just fucking beaming in the wind on a fucking train flying. Never flew off his head. God bless. Eventually, Dr. Voller gets fucking beamed by like a mail arm, or like a water fill-up arm for the train. Like, as the train's whizzing past it, he gets dummied by this thing. And that's the last we see of him for the next 24 years. So 24 years later, 1969, we happen upon Dr. Jones again. He's retired in New York City. There's a scene where he gets up out of bed. He's not wearing a shirt, and he looks damn good for 81. I'll tell you that for sure. Unfortunately, his wife Marion has left him. Their son Mutt died in Vietnam, which is a kind of an interesting plot that runs through. He died in Vietnam, so, you know, Dr. Jones becomes this kind of like staunch anti-war kind of guy, and it's beautiful. It's a really well written movie. Honestly, I don't really know why it got as bad critical review as it is. Not like it's got tanked, but it's well done. Eventually, his goddaughter Helena Shaw, daughter of Basil Shaw, unexpectedly visits, asking about Archimedes' dial. And there's some history going on with Basil and Indy, where Basil really, you know, once they retrieved the dial from the Nazis, Basil kept it himself, and he got obsessed with it and really thought that it was possible to work, but he could only use half of it. And Indy was convinced that he was losing his mind because of it, and he felt guilty about it. And he took the dial back from Basil, and Basil kind of continued to go wild and never really recovered. So Indy hid it, and Helena knew about it, and she wanted to find it. And she said, you know, she was interested in it, and she wanted to learn more about it and learn what, you know, drove her father crazy. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, Dr. Voller, who is now working for NASA as Dr. Schmidt, probably brought over in Operation Paperclip, which was a well written, historically accurate theme by the writers. Dr. Voller, or Dr. Schmidt, aided by the CIA, are also trying to find the dial. I can't remember how Voller convinces the CIA to help him. I don't know exactly how that is all. It's a little bit convoluted, but again, we're trying to drive the plot here, people. This is Indiana Jones. Eventually, Dr. Voller, and his henchmen, he basically has these two fucking goony henchmen come in. They end up shooting a couple people. The CIA is like, what the fuck's going on here? Dr. Jones actually ends up getting framed for the two murders, which is kind of funny because he didn't do it. He didn't kill his wife, kind of like a la Fugitive, which I thought was kind of funny. And while all this is happening, Helena turns out to be an antiquities smuggler, and she fucking steals the Antikythera mechanism from Indiana Jones. And she's an antiquities smuggler, somewhat like another smuggler we might know, Han Solo. Funny. Lucasfilm. Maybe. Anyway, coincidence? I think not. Anywho. While this is happening, they're going through an Apollo 11 parade. They're going through an anti-war parade. And they're all trying to still find Dr. Jones, and Indy seeks refuge with his buddy Sala, who he brought over from Egypt, and I think it was Egypt, Jerusalem, Syria, Jordan. I can't remember where they were. Shit. Anyway, I think it was Egypt. And Sala comes over, and he's a New York cab driver, which I thought was kind of funny, maybe a tinge racist, but what are you going to do? Sala knows that they're going to go to Tangier to try and sell the Antikythera mechanism, Archimedes' dial. So Indy hops a flight, which is also hilarious because he's wanted fucking fugitive for murder, can just hop on a plane, a Pan Am, and get his ass to Tangier. Obviously, they do the classic airplane over a map with the red line, doing their whole fucking thing. Super classic. Jones intercepts Helena, steals the dial back, meets Teddy, who is Helena's child sidekick. Again, they kind of flipped the script there, but classic Indiana Jones shtick with the child sidekick. And they escape through the streets of Tangier in a tuk-tuk, which I guess is a little bit of another Indiana Jones shtick, that there's like some interesting vehicle involved. I will say this, they didn't make Indiana Jones do more, other than the train bit, which I mentioned before. They didn't really make Indiana Jones or Harrison Ford himself do a lot of shit that made him look like he was unable to. He seemed like he knew what he was capable of. He never really extended himself. You know, there wasn't like scenes where, you know, he tries to jump across something and doesn't make it because, I'm an old man, I don't know my strength anymore. No, he was more like, I know exactly what I'm capable of, and I'm gonna fucking keep doing what I'm doing. Schmidt actually ends up killing his CIA handlers and basically goes fully rogue once he lays eyes on Archimedes' dial again. And then the whole crew absconds to Greece. So Indy, Helena, and Teddy peace out to Greece to try to outrun the Nazis, because they know that's where they're going to head to try to find the Graphicos, which is a map towards the other half of Archimedes' dial. So Indy goes and finds his friend Ronaldo, who is played by Antonio Banderas, who I barely recognized Antonio Banderas the first time I saw him. It was fucking wild. He was looking old. I mean, they made him look old. They made him look like an old fucking Sicilian sea captain. So I get it. And they dive and they find this Graphicos in the other half of the ship, which is a map to the other half of the dial that was also held on the ship that went down, that originally held the half of the Archimedes dial. So Archimedes initially split it in half so that the Romans wouldn't be able to use it, but he sent it off with some Romans, or he sent it off with some fucking centurions or whatever, and he sent half of it with the map to the other half. So why don't you just fucking keep it together? I don't know. Everything's a little bit cryptic here. But again, it's Indiana Jones. Let's not go into it. They find the Graphicos. Sadly, Ronaldo is killed, and they're trying to escape, and they're doing all this and you know, evasive maneuvers, and Teddy and Helena and Indy finally get away, and they have the Graphicos, and Helena and Teddy are excited, and they're celebrating and yelling and carrying on and this and that. And they look over at Indy, and he's like, kind of like, shut the fuck up. Like, my buddy just was killed, which I thought was a really interesting humanizing scene of this whole thing. I thought was beautiful. Anyway, Indy, Helena, and Teddy head to Sicily, and they go inside the ear of Dionysus, which is called like the Occhio di Dionysus or whatever, which I thought was funny because it's all about like echoes in there. So I wonder if the word echo actually comes from that thing, because it's obviously been echoing in there probably before we came up with the word fucking echo, right? Interesting. Anyway, inside the ear of Dionysus, which is this beautiful cave in Sicily, they inevitably find Archimedes' tomb, and they're kind of climbing through things and going up and down different, again, classic Indiana Jones, following this little map towards X marks the spot. And there's a scene where they're climbing up this like sheer rock face, and Helena, you know, is this young healthy woman kind of climbing, going after it, and she starts ribbing Indy because he's kind of waiting on a ledge, resting a little bit, and she's kind of giving him shit, and he's kind of like, fuck you, like, you know, I deserve a little bit of chill time here, you know. You weren't shot 8 times, 1 time by your father or whatever he says. You weren't forced to drink the blood of the Kali, which happens to him in Indiana Jones Temple of Doom. You know, all the different things, seen fucking things that he's never seen. Like, he talks about that in a separate scene, not to digress, but there's a lot of these callbacks to him, like remembering things that had happened to him in the past. And it's not corny. They're not flashbacky. They make sense in the writing. It's perfect. And just the way this scene of him resting on this, going through this kind of laundry list of all the things that have happened to him, you're like, holy shit. He's lived a long life. He's lived a strong life. He's done everything he's wanted to do. He's gone out there and he's fought for history and he's fought for science and doing the right thing, you know, as Indiana Jones does. He's great. He's the great Indiana Jones. So inevitably they find Archimedes' tomb, like I said. They find the second half of the dial. But on the outside of the tomb, they're looking and they see strange markings on the tomb, like the etching of like what looks like a phoenix, but it has propellers on its wings. And then they also notice something else on Archimedes' wrist, and it's a 20th century wristwatch. And they're like, what the fuck is going on here? Why are there all these futuristic components to Archimedes' tomb? He was buried, you know, thousands of years ago. Voller appears and shoots Indy. He's no longer Schmidt. He's Voller again. Voller himself reassembles the dial and starts to get it to work. And he reveals his plan after he's, you know, subsequently shot Indy. And as all villains do, decided this is the time to reveal his entire plan. And his plan is to use the dial to go back in history to 1939 and kill Hitler and then win the war for Germany himself. Voller uses the dial to locate a time fissure to go back to 1939. Indy's held captive. They take him with, I actually don't even fucking know, maybe just to show off. But Voller takes Indy with him. Helena ends up stowing away in like the landing gear, and then Teddy follows in another fucking plane. He just finds another plane at this airfield and fucking takes off in it, and he chases this like huge German Luftwaffe whatever the fuck bomber. While approaching the fissure, so the Germans find this fissure, and while they're approaching it, Jones realizes that continental drift may affect the coordinates of the time fissure, because Archimedes didn't know about continental drift back in 212 BC, and it probably is going to throw off the coordinates. You can see Mickelson's fucking tripping out. Voller, is tripping out. Mickelson does a really interesting job. Indy has this really interesting attitude at this point because he's been shot. I think he really thinks he's about to die. So he's kind of like, we're not even going to fucking go to where you think we're going to go. Like, you fucked up. So Voller's like, fuck it, pull the plug, abort. Too late. They're getting pulled into the time fissure. They get spit out in what they think is Sicily. Like they look across the water and they're like, oh, look, it worked. We're in this whole new time, it seems. And as they're flying in, trying to see what Sicily looks like, they notice there's like Roman fucking centurions and crazy like legions launching fucking shit with trebuchets and crazy fucking arrows and large fucking spears and lances and all types of shit. And they're like, fuck, we fucked up. They actually wind up at the siege of Syracuse of 2012 BC. So he completely fucked up. Voller had no idea where the fuck he was going. He thought he was going to send it to where he thought he was going to go. While the Romans and Greeks are going at it, they notice there's a fucking giant black bird metal thing in the sky. They have no idea. Never seen an airplane before in their lives. They think it's a fucking dragon. So they start trying to shoot it down, which I think is fucking hilarious and probably exactly what they would do. They shoot down the plane. Indy and Helena are able to jump out. Teddy lands his plane, and Archimedes actually goes up and assesses the battle, or assesses the crash site of the plane, because he was watching this whole thing unfold. And the important thing about the siege of Syracuse and why Archimedes is 100% there is because he was the one that was integral of fighting off the Romans. Actually, at the time, he was using like crazy mirror shit, Archimedes fire. There was all kinds of crazy, like, cool defense mechanisms that Archimedes had created for Syracuse. He ended up getting killed at the end of that by like a Roman soldier just for no fucking reason. But what are you going to do? So anyway, Archimedes finds the rest of the dial that he's already been working on. He's like, what the fuck? This shit's already done. And takes the wristwatch off of Voller. And it turns out that Archimedes actually designed the dial to always bring them back to 2012. Like when he was originally creating the dial, that's what he was doing. He was trying to create something to get them back. Again, this is this weird, anytime you write a story about time travel, you always get into this really weird circular aspect where you really dig down to it. You're like, so if he was always supposed to come back, how was it ever created in the first place? And like, maybe that is a metaphor. Maybe that is what really time is this weird, repeating, slightly different, ever so slightly changed. Like it's music. Maybe it's like music. There's this repetition until there's this ever so slight change. And then all of a sudden there's this whole new era that becomes really interesting. Anyway, one part of the movie, I guess, not that I'm critical of, but I would have loved to see. So again, like I mentioned, Indiana Jones was shot when Voller first found them. So hours later, they're in fucking 2012 BC, trying to get themselves home because Teddy has this other plane, and the time fissure's starting to close. So they're like, we got to go. Indy's like, fuck it. I want to stay here. I want to see, like, I'm witnessing history. This is things I've studied my entire life. Let me go. Let me die here. And in some ways, I almost wanted them to. I almost wanted them to let it. As much as that's fucking morbid, I almost wanted them because I thought that would have been a really beautiful, heroic death for Mr. Indiana Jones. But every once in a while, you got to have that happy ending. It's the 5th installment, presumably the last. Helena ends up cold cocking. Indy knocks him out, gets him back on the plane, brings him back home. He wakes up in bed. And who's at the door? But Marion. She comes in. They kiss. All is happy in New York City. I think, again, overall great movie. Really loved it. I'm really happy I got to see it with my pops in theaters. Hopefully theater is back. Hopefully cinema is back. Go out and watch a movie. Go out and check a movie. Thank you for watching. I love you all. You guys are the best. Hit us up on our DMs at the Bigmark Pod, at the Bigmark Podcast, wherever you are, whenever you are. Thank you for being here. Patreon.com/the Bigmark Pod. Tell your friends. Check us out. Go to the movies. I love y'all. See you later, Dr. Jones.